I'm going to introduce somebody who you may have met previously, Professor Andrew Chitty. Andrew's going to convene the last panel, which is looking at how we move beyond the sector deal. So, ladies and gentlemen, over to Andrew for the final panel.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. So, yeah, final panel. Really interesting day. We will try to keep this interesting as well. So, what we're talking about is beyond the sector deal, because where we're at the moment, and indeed the funding for one of these for the clusters program and also the immersive program that we're working through at the moment, they both come out of a vision of growth in particular important sectors like the creative industries, driven by research and innovation. Now that's a first for us in the creative industries. That kind of model has been used across all other industries as well. But bringing these together is around the creative industries it's a start. But I guess what I want to discuss with my expert panel here is where we go next. So if this is a start, if this is, as I think Sir Peter Bowser said first thing this morning, we're on our way, where are we going is always a good thing. So what I've got here is a panel. Now, the first thing to point out is that even the amazing production team I work with can't cope with changing the slide when someone suddenly falls ill. So Andrew Thompson isn't with us, but is ably deputed by Alex, who's had about 5 minutes to prepare for this. But as Chief Operating Officer of the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the person responsible for the Clusters Programme, Pro Tem, is in a really good place to give us this perspective from the research funders and how the research funders link with government. We've then got two of the leading, most interesting, I think, creative businesses who are heavily R&D focused. So John Cassy from Factory 42, now Whitley from Marshmallow Laser Feast. I know it's always difficult for everybody else, and I think you did that deliberately, to be honest. We've got a very leading research scientist, as I think of you, Marian, but I don't know how you would describe yourself. But Professor Marian Ursu from York University sits at a kind of in the north of the country, a kind of growing nexus of these programs. So starting with Digital Creativity Labs, which is now layered on top of it, the Creative Media Labs. So we've got someone who's deeply embedded in industry-oriented research programs. And then, of course, and I know Patrick will hate this, but Patrick Bladley represents the money. Because if there is a model of R&D-led innovation, of course, the value isn't generated entirely within the phase that we're all working in, which is the research. What we have to do is it has to be taken on and translated into economic value within companies. And that obviously is a big step. So it's vital, I think, for us going forwards that we always think of our research and innovation in relationship to investment in the companies that will exploit it in the future. So I think Patrick, who also sits on our advisory group to kind of keep us honest about this and keep reminding of this, I think can above all add that kind of perspective. So can we start with the assumptions? So the assumption underlying all this is that research and development, research and innovation drives economic growth. But I want to just have a look at that from your different perspectives. So let's start with the unproblematic one, from the research perspective. From where you sit in the programs you've been involved in, Marian, how does the kind of research that we're talking about drive value and drive value in companies? This was the unproblematic start.
This is a question that I wasn't briefed about, so I'll improvise. It's this label that we've used in the past, knowledge transfer. There's a lot happening in universities, and that has to find a channel into the industry. And I think the mechanism that we have here with the Creative Industries Clusters program, with the Digital Economy program earlier funded by the AHRC, these are clear mechanisms that allow that link, that at least in my experience, in the past, wasn't made. So ad hoc, accidentally, in the past, certain research results made it into the commercial sector or the third sector. But now we have dedicated mechanisms for doing that, and I think that's the value that this program brings.
And when you, because you work on, you've got lots of projects where you're working with industry as well. How about a knowledge transfer? To me has always seemed kind of slightly problematic, because it kind of imagines there's all this knowledge locked up in universities. They know everything, and the poor united businesses should inherit that some.
So how does it materialize?
Yeah. So how does it materialize, and how does it change it if the businesses are involved from the start? So they're saying what the problems are.
Again, I'm going to go to all sorts of established labels, and I hate myself for that, but it's the term.
It's not very you, to be honest.
Well, thank you. Co-creation is the term. And to give an example, we've had now 3 years of operation of digital creativity labs at York. We have over 100 companies involved in the digital creativity labs. They come to our meetings, they come on one-to-one meetings, they come for advice. Of course, you need to establish that reputation of a place, a center, where industry can seek inspiration and advice. Then we as academics reach to the industry to understand the challenges we want to work on, and we formulate very clear, specific projects centered around very specific challenges. And then we execute those. And if you deliver, then you gain the credibility of the industry, who then come, and it's kind of amplifying process. And it is indeed buzzing, it is fantastic. It's not always the norm in the arts and humanities, as I find. I'm a computer scientist at heart, and just found my place in the humanities. We have the model of the sole researcher in the arts and humanities, but what we do here in the connection with the creative industries, I think that the methods that we have in this program are essential.
Now, can I turn to you from the business perspective? So you describe yourself, and I think, really recognised for Marshmallow Laser Feast being a kind of very innovation-driven, research-driven company. So that interaction with universities versus your own way of doing R&D, how does that work?
It's a good question. And does it always work? Like, it does, for sure, I think, but it's also complex because, and we've mentioned this to a few people, we're often, as a studio, driving for a solution, a creative solution. So we do research because we often the tool doesn't exist in the world that we want in order to make the experience we want. So we find the way to make that happen. And we did that just with ourselves and inside the studio for a long time. And then we started thinking, oh, hold on a second, there's an opportunity here to work with research institutions to go beyond, or to kind of do dedicated R&D rather than kind of project by project R&D. And it's been really interesting, and also culturally kind of really interesting to learn about the practice of R&D in different scenarios, with just different people who approach research in a different way. We're like, let's go, let's make this solution. As Anthony said before, R&D under pressure, not undue pressure, just the pressure of production to allow you to get to a place you really want to be. Because, when those constraints come in, it does allow you, we call it the happy accidents or whatever it might be. But when working with research establishments, they've often been like, we just need the space to do research. We need the time and space to go wrong, to fail, for things to just kind of not happen, and then to find another way through. And we're there going, oh my God, come on, and almost overproducing it. And that culturally it's problematic. And I think these opportunities that are arising, lots, and have done with the sector deal, are fantastic for us as studios. But we've learned an awful lot about how to best design the research. So, these kind of terms like critical path, I had never heard of before. And I'm like, oh, right, halfway through a 1.5 year long project. Yeah, you don't want to be critical path, okay. How do we deal with that? And we always find a way around, and we end up in a good place. But it's, I think, thinking about beyond, that kind of co-creation between industry and research could, and I'm sure there's better case studies than just what I'm talking about, but we could work through that even more, I think, together to really think about what works both for the business and the institution, but also the wider sector around, to kind of, so that benefit's really kind of embedded in all parties.
John, I think I've always found our conversations really interesting because you come from, you won't be offended, I'm sure, by, you come from a really commercial place, and then you set up Factory 42 as a kind of production studio.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in terms of building value in the business? From relationships with universities or relationships with, as you've done with cultural institutions who are research organisations?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, our company is very sort of firmly focused on this future point where the worlds of television, games and film are going to kind of merge, and technology is going to throw up opportunities to tell stories and create experiences in new ways. And so what we're trying to do is, I guess, find our way to that point in the most effective and high quality way. And you could call it R&D, you could call it winging it and making it up as you go along. But what we've started to do, and I think we've probably only sort of recently realised there's this whole world out there, which probably sounds really stupid, but off the back of some work that we did with the Natural History Museum and David Attenborough in terms of creating an experience where people could come face to face to David and pick up and manipulate objects and things you're not allowed to do in museums, it then led us to sort of start to build university relationships with people who had really, really deep knowledge built on years and years of research, which we would never have had the capacity or the time to do. And it's been a tremendous eye-opener. We've learned a load from it. And we're now starting to look at ways that we can apply and work with universities to apply that thinking to a kind of very practical outcome.
Cool. So this looks like this assumption that R&D can drive value from the research community, given that they find a way of working with the businesses that actually works for both and timescales and things. This sounds pretty plausible. I just want to turn to you, Patrick, then. From the point of view of value from an investment point of view, I kind of guess over the last kind of 2 decades, we've got very used to that as a technology story. It seems plausible. People build technology, that drives value, that drives investor value. We can fund these companies along the runway and they grow. I'm just wondering how that looks. Obviously, your expertise is investment in creative businesses. Does it hold to such a tight logic, do you think? And is it about technology, or what are you looking at from the point of view of an investable proposition?
Well, I think the first thing to say, just following up from your introduction, is that it's about making money, return on investment. And what investors want to see is proximity to revenue and profit. So in any model they're looking at, they're always asking themselves, obviously, about risk, quantifying that risk, but also looking to see how that particular business monetizes itself. Now, what we're seeing in the market at the moment is continual disruption into the market as new technologies come through, and they will always create opportunities for creative businesses to leverage off that. Because if we think about immersive, for example, that technology, which a lot of investors like ourselves do not want to invest in, we don't want to take the investment risk, but actually what it's doing is creating a new generation of content to be delivered to either gamers or people who want audio-visual content. And actually what we're seeing is traditional ways of monetizing it are still there. In other words, if you're going to immersive theatre, people are still buying tickets. There is opportunities for sponsorship, merchandising, food and beverage. So all of that revenue is being driven off it. Now, as new technologies like virtual reality come into the market, there are some other considerations, which is we can't control the uptake of the technology. We can't control the uptake of headsets. And I think the jury's out at the moment in certain areas of virtual reality as to whether monetization will really grow to sufficient volume to attract investors on a whole-scale basis. Because we don't know whether that way of consuming content is going to be successful. But ultimately, investors, as I say, are always about quantifying risk, looking at how big a market could be, but what monetization is present, how can that be demonstrated, and then returns on investment.
So that, in some ways, it's kind of, there is no new world in that sense. These are, you know, the solid basis of investment in any creative business over the years. It's about the ability to monetize, not about the ability to innovate.
Well, I think the ability to innovate is crucial, because just as all human beings here, what we like to do is we like to participate in new forms of entertainment. And actually, if you look at what's going on in terms of human behavior across the developed world, more and more people want to consume storytelling in lots of different ways, in different platforms, different media. But ultimately, having been around for quite a long time, I think the way of monetizing remains stable. Actually, one of the big changes over the last 5 years is to see that people are beginning to pay for content and subscribe, and actually moving towards specialist interest, i.e. unbundling content that they don't want to participate in, and actually paying for content which has a particular quality for them. And the great thing about technology is, obviously, in terms of innovation, it's speed of access to that content. So technology is driving audiences to be able to consume content in different ways, but also to monetize it.
Okay, so that brings together quite a few of the things we've heard today, I think, particularly about which are the disciplines that drive some of that innovation. So before we leave the assumption things, Alex, I'm turning to you at this point. You knew this was going to happen. So it's often been described that what we're trying to do here is to fund research that's for the creative industries rather than about them. Do you think that still holds? And I suppose what I'm intrigued about is, after some of the things we've heard today, are we trying to supercharge a practice that's there, or are we trying to actually make a kind of new form of research, particularly in the universities?
So I think my experience over the last year, as having been involved with Creative Industries Clusters programme, but also on the periphery of Audiences of the Future, is that there is demand for this. It is a very different way of thinking about it at times, and actually I think the very long process that we've been through with the Creative Industries Clusters programme shows that we have had to bring people with us with the different type of programme this is, especially for the Arts and Humanities Research Council. This is a different way of funding, so thinking about the sort of more R&D elements, the research for rather than about. But I think we can't leave totally the research about the creative industries behind. We need both. There are still some really big endemic issues which we don't understand, which actually we still need to be investing in. So things around diversity of the sector. I think, there have been comments about our panels again today. But actually, some of this is a bigger problem than a conference that we still need to do the research about. But we need both to come hand in hand. And actually, with the Creative Industries Clusters programme, we know there's the demand there. If we look at the 9 that we've funded, we can see that there are gaps. What I think we have as a challenge as a programme is how we can now work with this first cohort to share the learning, make sure that in the really, really strong cohort that we're building, we make sure it's permeable so that that learning can go out. And should we actually have the privilege of doing a second cohort, we can make sure that some of those areas which are showing perhaps as deserts within the map of the UK, we can make sure that there are the opportunities so that we're not just creating more of the same. Yep. We are actually making sure that there are other sectors, other regions that can benefit from the same research and development activities as we are bringing on with the programme.
Yeah, and I guess one of the other areas there that's been threaded throughout the day is the mix of disciplines as well. So when we talk about this kind of the creative research side of it rather than the kind of for industry, and I'm just wondering how. Again, from a research and from a business point of view, how does that mix of how good are we at the moment of getting that right mix of disciplines together to do the kind of research and innovation piece, and also then to spread it into the businesses? Marian, you look like you want to go first.
I always want to go first. We're getting better. But if we look back, I'm going to take a start the digital economy program that was funded by the EPSRC. We had to work within the remit of the EPSRC. And
how would you describe that? Because not everybody's kind of...
yes, I beg your pardon. We
Feel free to caricature at this point.
We were... No. Goodbye my funding. No, I can't do that. We can operate within the scope of technology development. But when it comes to form that complements technology development, EPSRC is not that happy to allow us to spend money. So let's say we make some new animation technique, but we can't make 2 or 3 games that illustrate that technique. And when this program was published, I thought, oh, godsend, because they complement perfectly. And the remit here was, well, don't push too much into technology, stay with the form. And I think quite rightly now, because there's a lot of tech, and there are giants that develop tech. So I think form lags behind the technology that is available. But still, there are some boundaries of the programs and of funding. So there is a tendency to converge, but I think there's more to do. And even when you apply for grants, you still have to stay within the boundaries of a research council or of a specific program. So I think those boundaries ought to be removed for proper innovation, because it's just this spiral, the dialogue between technology development and creative practice done quickly, dirty, do it, and don't force me to put any boundaries. And I think that's where the novelty comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% support that from my point of view as well, that that way of working gets us to really exciting places, but obviously everyone has to justify why money goes to certain places and certain people, and so we understand the funding boundaries. I guess what's a shame is that we end up finding ourselves kind of going, oh, we can't really do that, and we can't do that, and then for us with some of the research funds we've had, that we're really grateful that we've managed to get them as a studio, have ended up putting us in a place of like, we've got this really interesting tech tool, an innovative tool, and we want to kind of make it a kind of production ready tool for other people to use and get it out there. But we're not an independent software vendor, as I sort of learned as an acronym recently. So I was like, okay, we don't really want to push loads of resources down there to scale our studio into providing that. We want to just keep using it and over the process of doing that, creating content, making experiences, get other people to use it as well and distribute it that way. And that's an interesting growth challenge of where research might leave you, or where you come at the end of a process. You go, great, don't know what to do with this, because it's not necessarily led me down the path, the strategy that us as a studio had in terms of growth. And that's something that we're working through at the moment, which is an interesting challenge and kind of a good challenge to have, but then it ultimately dictates your fundraising strategy, whether that be grants, investment, or whatever it is. So yeah, it's new.
So that is an interesting growth challenge, isn't it? And I wonder where the kind of the R&D kind of model can help with that. I mean, John, you must find as well that you're operating at the edge of the technology. So it's quite hard, as Nell said, to be in a position where you're trying to create an experience, but actually you're having to glue bits and things together and platforms together underneath. So how do you, I mean, let's be honest, that's broken quite a few companies that I've known when they've gone from content to product. How do you decide which bit of the line, and do you think folk like Marian can help you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's one of the big challenges, which is particularly because a lot of the things we're talking about right now, if you took a sort of commercial view on them, a lot of them are sort of pre-market or at the verge of market. So it's how you actually make money. You know, we're a relatively new business, and you know, we've pretty much been self-funded since we got going, and so you're always concerned about cash flow and how you get funded, all those sorts of things. But I think it's, you know, there are certain truths which you've got to make sure you've got amazing people, and there's as much about aptitude as it is about expertise. But then if you can go outside of your company, where you will have a limit to the resources you have within the walls of your office, and work with organizations like yours or other partners out in the industry, I think that's when it starts to get really, really interesting. And it's about piecing together those partnerships, I think, that work where you bring complementary people together who can make something that is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think the challenge for us as a business is to make sure that if we partner with your organisation, we're bringing something that's genuinely valuable to you, as well as learning from you.
Okay. So here we are. We're kind of an interesting point. So we're kicking off something. We kicked off something big today, and the sector deal itself has got that program in it. It's got Audience of the Future in it. It's got the Cultural Development Fund. So we've got into a position where I suppose the money on the table is somewhere north of £100 million of activity, and a large part of that, the vast majority of it, is these R&D programs. So there's a couple of things to ask. Alex, a lot of that has come from within this new driven by this new organisation, UKRI. Do you think UKRI knows where we're going to go next? I mean, I could understand it if you said, show us some results first. But do you think it would change the way UKRI thinks of the creative sector?
So I think it builds on some of the points that the rest of the panel have been making around the multi and interdisciplinarity. I think bringing UKRI together, all the research councils plus Innovate together, gives us the opportunity to do some more novel, innovative things that really do go beyond those disciplinary boundaries. It also gives us a chance to look at our processes and make sure, actually, can we do things more speedily? Can we turn things around? The Creative Industries Clusters programme was a year-long process. That's not speedy.
No. But it was quite speedy for universities. Apparently, we had lots of complaints when we were pushing it through that this was happening far too fast.
But taking the learning from that process and making sure that we are looking at some of the other issues as well. Yes, we need results. We need that return on investment, because actually that's the strings that are attached to this money. Yep. This is about economic growth. But how do we make sure that we share that learning across disciplines, across sectors, that we are getting, where appropriate, the growth within SMEs, that we're allowing freelancers to access this, just thinking about the dynamics of the creative industry sectors that are there. There's a lot of learning to do.
Yep.
I can't say that all of that expertise is within UKRI.
Yep.
So we do need to make sure that we're tapping into the sector itself. I think the Policy and Evidence Centre is going to really be a tremendous resource. But again, it's pulling in from all these different elements and making sure that we've got the right partnerships.
So that's interesting. I think you're absolutely right, that the different configuration, I mean, Marian was talking about, there's EPSRC, which is Engineering and Physical Sciences, there's AHRC, I think, but now they're all in this organisation that can fund businesses to do research and fund universities to do research and hopefully make them work together better. So that's a potentially very powerful tool. But this isn't the end of the line, what we've done now. So I'm wondering, what are we missing? Patrick, are we, because the sector deal came together, it looks brilliant, but it came together from a whole bunch of things happening simultaneously. It wasn't, how should I put this? It wasn't a rational process. If we were to design, if we were to, having done it once, think about where we go now, what are we missing in terms of sectors or opportunities out there that you see?
Well, I think I'd say two things. First of all, I think what we've got to ensure is that there is a pathway to commercialisation and to investment. So I think what we do need to ensure is that the right level of communication is taking place with either investment funds, industrial counterparties, which helps then to shape the programme going forward. Now, the R&D side of it is great because that is the riskiest form of investment, which most private investors do not want to put themselves at risk for. But I think what would work well is to see more interaction and more communication with the ultimate funders or investors going forward. So that would be the first thing I'd say. And then I think what we have become aware of is that some of the initiatives and some of the outputs from what we're doing here actually speak to other sectors of the economy.
Yep.
And I think that's also very positive because it means that we can bring in additional cohorts of potential investors, counterparties, and industrial partners. So whether that's in areas such as engineering or car manufacturing or education, I think that would be what I would see as the next sort of development, if you like, going out to those sectors to get them to participate.
So let's take that for a moment, because it's a really interesting thing, and it's been an ongoing debate on the things that we've been doing. Is, do you focus entirely on the creative industries? Do you talk about creativity, a lot of things that you guys do, adding value in other sectors? I think that's what Sol was talking about with automotive earlier in the day. So what would be the sector? So how would we do that? Design it live for us. How would you describe a program that did that, that looked to exploit the opportunities where the creative innovation interfaces with other bits? Perhaps maybe starting with particular sectors. John?
I mean, I've just got a thought on this. Is, what we found is if you go and try, effectively, one of our big jobs at the minute is selling people the future. Right, we're selling them a sort of an image, a picture of what a future experience might be like, and that's pretty hard when you haven't got one to show them. And so I think proof of concepts or demonstrators, as you're doing, or things where actually, research that leads to a tangible thing, particularly in the creative sector, where people can experience in some way, shape, or form. When we went to get our Attenborough project funded, we had the most recognisable face and trusted person in Britain, and it still took us a year and a half to probably get the money to get that done. And in a way, that was completely understandable, because all we were doing really is waving a 2-page piece of paper under somebody's nose and saying, give us a load of money. And fortunately, they took the risk. And it was probably only when we actually delivered the thing that they realised what they had. And that then led to an institutional shift in what they were going to invest in immersive generally. And so I think that kind of proof of concept type thing is really useful. And also you can then take that into sectors outside the creative industries.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's like how much, it's a bit of a content studio led thought, as you'll see, but like how much money does it really take to make something look really amazing? And like there's something about the quality a piece which we don't talk about that much, and I'm not saying that we've nailed it completely, but there is something where we're driving for whether it's a cinematic look or if it's in terms of installation finish, like and I know other people here too are driven in the same ways to make nascent technologies kind of fit in the final look and experience of what you're trying to create. And I think that it's creating those proof of concepts to the degree that you really want to prove the quality that you're going for as a studio, that you can then apply to those sectors beyond. Because you're kind of saying, this is us, these are our sensibilities, this is how we want to apply this thinking to your industry to innovate there, or use our solution, beyond what we want to do. I think there's something around quality, finish, those minds that make that happen, whether they be in research institutions or private companies. It's getting those people together.
And again, I think it comes down to the breaking down these boundaries and not just seeing it as the creative industries versus healthcare, but actually seeing
That'd be a good fight though, wouldn't it? Yeah, we could talk our way out of that one, I think. It's the only thing we've got on our side.
But it's about remembering that actually other disciplines will help make the meaning out of the technologies, and it is breaking down those and actually using where the knowledge, expertise, the co-production can come together and actually create a solution. It doesn't matter whether it's from creative industries or healthcare, but actually we're doing something that for the well-being of a particular individual or person, is going to make a difference. I mean,
it's very strange. Again, there's something Sol said about, and I think this is the challenge for the creative sector in that kind of engagement with other industries, the idea that what you go is from creating content to driving business change. And that can be, that's a very different kind of skill set, particularly if having worked in a few years in healthcare. That's really, really hard. Patrick, I know we've had this conversation that you think there are exciting businesses to be built at those kind of interfaces, don't they? But where do you think the spaces are that are particularly interesting?
Well, I think that just from what we see going on, the sort of businesses that come across our radar, with technology like VR, obviously the airlines are adopters of that in terms of safety and simulation and training. And I think one point to always bear in mind is adoption by other industries will be driven by factors like cost savings. And we had Qatar Airlines in about 18 months ago with their VR proposition built around training engineers on the ground and also flight crews. And really what was driving that was if they had a virtual reality aircraft where you can move around the cabin, you could move around the engines, etc. The aircraft that they would have had on the ground, the real aircraft, is actually up in the air earning revenue for them. So they're making a real saving by not having that. In fact, they're keeping that developing revenue. So I think around that sort of training and safety programs, we've certainly seen people like QuitFit and others who are adopting that. I think in the insurance industry, which I think now is driven by human behavior, using content to actually find out how people react to certain types of scenarios with content. It's a very broad application, and the creative industries have that knowledge. And I think the issue really is that I think the creative industries at the moment haven't really sort of engaged or spread itself amongst those other industries, but I think that there's a real opportunity there.
Interesting for us, like when we talk about trying to exploit our research or whatever the terminology you want to use is, we're finding things like we'll talk to the tech, the hardware person that's providing something to us and say, this is what we're doing with your technology, and they're like, oh, okay, and they look like they're not interested, or they're just kind of like, all right, mulling on it, and then 6 months later they come back and go, you're the only people we've found in 6 months, and this is a US example, doing this particular thing. Can you talk to this retail giant or whatever about what you're doing, because they're also trying to solve this problem? And I think it's just a proof of that kind of thinking outside the box, because you want to create change, because you want to create a solution for a creative experience you want to make, can lead you down this quite interesting path. And what we need to do is work out what comes after, like talent pipelines, like growth. How do we make sure we can make the most of all those opportunities? It doesn't have to be us. I'm not. For us, we would rather collaborate with people beyond our organisation to kind of make sure we can take the opportunity and grow the UK economy in order to make the most of all those opportunities. But I think we can think differently, we can think creatively about that plan or those growth plans.
And I guess, again, referring back to what Rachel Cooper was saying earlier on, is that maybe one of the problems there is about translation, and design is a language that you can use for that kind of translation. Are we missing any sectors? It's really interesting at the moment. So Marian, I know this is an area that you know about. So it's quite interesting. So I'm very struck by the strength of the kind of live performance sector in the UK. And are we missing something there? Because we haven't. I'm wondering why we've missed it so far. Maybe it's process. Maybe we weren't looking. Is it a research opportunity?
I'm going to be a politician for a second. No, for 2 minutes. And answer a different question.
This I've been waiting to see for a long time.
I wanted to answer. I'll answer a different question. I want you to give a different perspective to what we do. So what we've acknowledged so far, the assumption is that there's lots of technology out there. Dave Bull at some point said, well, maybe VR will not survive. Yes, maybe not, but there will be a lot of devices, and interconnectivity is growing, and pipelines are growing, and many pixels and millions of pixels, and so on and so forth. And our quest here is, how do we respond to that? How do we create experiences, stories that respond to that technology development? So kind of lagging. And the angle I want to bring is that, okay, that's fine. We have money to do that, and it's a great investment that the UK is making it, and it could push our economy forward. But to deal with the complexities of these technologies, we need machine support. Our minds cannot conceive the experiences that are possible in this hugely interconnected and hugely rich virtual world. Therefore, so we need some tools to help us, and I pose here, we need machine intelligence, so at least we need some analytical skills provided by technology, but I think AI is possible a solution to allow us to co-create, to have conversation with the machine as I have with a human, to build these experiences. And then furthermore, we can endow the media objects that we create with autonomous behavior. And we just release them in the world. So one, how on earth do we author that? And I put ethics here clearly on the table. How do I author something that just goes out there and does things on its own? And I think, so backtracking, I think we need to understand as us humans, how do we now interact with machines that are able of intelligence and autonomy?
Okay, so that's good. That's a clear ask of the next evolution, is to consider the role of AI and machine learning in the creative process, in the production process, in the consumption, and of all of the outputs of our. So that's really clear. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to turn to.
And ethics.
And ethics is a part of that, and that's again
crucial.
Something that's
arts and humanities. Like, what is it to be human? There, sorry.
So that sounds great. Oh, yeah. So we're taking notes on that, right?
Yeah.
We'll get on with it and come back to you with that.
Is there a sector deal on AI?
There is a sector deal,
so why aren't we,
a completely separate one. That's a very good point.
Why aren't the creative industries in there?
No, but for the two companies. So you know what are you looking to do next, and where are you going to follow the things that you've done? Obviously, we've got other investments that will, be announced over the next few months. So John, from Factory's point of view, what are you looking for from research support, R&D support?
So I think what we're trying to do is build on the sort of work that we did with the David Attenborough project, where we gave people powers that they don't normally have in real life. And because I think you have to find a way to make a differentiated experience, that people have got so many media choices at the minute, whether it's television, which is in a kind of golden age, or apps or radio, whatever. You have to find a way to give somebody something very different. And I think we scratched the surface of what is possible there, but I think it could go far, far further. And so we're continuing to develop ideas with museums about how their experience might be reimagined using a mixture of sort of narrative techniques and technology, because I see in my own small children, when I take them off to the museums, and they love bits of it, but they're also quite bored by a lot of it. And I think trying to find the way to look at how you can make museums a sort of living, breathing, animated experience, I think is a really, really interesting area. So that's something that we're just very passionate about. And the other area, I think, is just starting to work out how you can make really great scripted experiences come to life in an immersive world. And I think whoever cracks that will do brilliantly, because you only have to look at the appetite for drama on television at the minute, and you see the money that's being spent there, and in general the very high quality. But to be able to then place people in worlds where the story is both going on around them and they can influence it, I think is an incredibly exciting creative opportunity. And also, as a consumer, it's the sort of thing well worth doing.
And I think there's probably a connection between what Marian was just saying as well, because if you're going to create those narrative experiences, you need a level of autonomy from the characters within them as well.
Yes, and you need to develop the craft, and you're right, but we just started to look at VR, so we need probably a good number of years to develop all the grammars. But I go back, we need dedicated tools, because the spaces of creation, the universe of creativity is really big now. And our human mind alone, I fear, is not sufficient, perhaps just in singular points here and there, but not as a sustained effort. And I think if we crack that, we're leading. Goodbye, USA.
We're interested in, goodbye, USA. We're interested in a sort of creative inquiry around how are we more human. So in this world of automation, of ethics around that, and climate change, all these problems that we face. Ridiculous presidents. Like, how do we make sure that when we do create these experiences, that they are, and I completely agree with what John said about nailing narrative and those worlds that we can create those experiences for. But how do they remind us about what it is to be human, to have a human brain, to feel, to touch, to smell, all of those things that we try and put into our experiences, because ultimately we want to use machines, live with machines, however your perspective is on that, to make this world, this planet, be here for longer, become a beautiful, or return to a kind of richer place as it once was. So we're playing around with a lot of things like that, which is about remembering humanity within technologies and evolution of creative experience. And I think
again, there's a kind of unity there about dealing with the technology at a more sophisticated level and autonomy, about ethics, and about, John, I think the stuff that you're doing is around reimagining culture as well, and cultural experiences. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that all seems fantastically coherent, and it sounds like that would be something one could go ahead and do. Patrick, if we were to do that, in the end, if we want industrial strategy money to do things, we have to have propositions that, again, investable. If there was one thing that you would want set as a rule, what would it be?
Oh, that's quite a challenging question. I mean, I think it is always about scale. It's always about that route to monetization, and it's seeing something that is either innovative in the way that it delivers new content that people are going to want to consume and demand, or allows them to access it in a more, in a simpler, faster way to monetize that. And I think, just going back to the point I made about cost savings, and Noel's point about becoming more human, my view of the world is that we're probably becoming less human, and that actually the next set of interventions, particularly around the sort of new generation content companies, may well be a threat to the acting community, for example, because actually we're moving, if you look at the gaming sector, if you look at the quality of the rendition of those particular images, and you look at what is the greatest inflation in production budgets at the moment, it's the cost of talent. So I think ultimately we may well be moving to a situation where we are dealing with talent which is basically an avatar, effectively, which is owned by studios or owned by production companies, and that human talent, because it's too costly, will effectively be made redundant in that sense.
Okay, I think it's always good to end.
I haven't been drinking.
No,
not yet.
It's always good to end on a cautionary note, because I think sometimes we say too frequently that we're all incredibly creative, and they're creative industries, and then we're immune to the impacts of AI and advancing technologies because of the creativity. But you're absolutely right. We can see that already in the music business. With lots of playlists on Spotify actually generated by computers, not by musicians, and where music goes with its low bandwidth, the visual media follow. If we don't watch out. So I think that's a very good cautionary tale, because we've got from the research and business community an optimism, but actually a cautionary tale about believing our own hype about the impact of AI in the future. So that's something else to build in. I was trying to do a closer there, Marian.
A little response. Please allow me a little response.
Okay.
I think we are now in a capitalist society that is based on growth. And you're right about sustainability. Maybe we need to challenge the philosophy that drives our lives, because we are at a cusp. And it could be a qualitative change in the way we operate as humans. I think I wouldn't be worried if a robot or a virtual character is an actor, as long as I can enjoy and I can interact with it and with others. So I want to say that we, as a part of the arts and humanities consortium family, we need to look at the philosophical foundation of our living. How about that? How about that? Come on,
that was a damn better closer than I can do. So I'm just going to thank my panel. Thank you to Patrick Bradley, Whitley, Marian Ursu, John Cassy, and Alex Vincent. Thank you very much.